final webinar in our Critical Velocity series called Going the Distance, Integrating Foundational Skills Instruction Throughout the College Experience. In this series, we've learned how different institutions respond to the foundational skills crisis. So far we've heard from the presenters from the first 3 stages of foundational skill development. Susan, if you don't mind showing that slide, everybody can take a look at those 4 stages. We've offered insights and strategies on how they overcame barriers in order to achieve success. In this final webinar, we'll take a look at efforts in the final stage of employer signaling. This is when a campus commits to making sure all phases of the college education and all modes of learning explicitly support career readiness. Dr. Susan Burns, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean of Faculty at Clarke University, will discuss today the process of cultivating intentionality across all curricular and co-curricular activities in an effort to help students build their career and life narrative. Susan will share how the Clarke Compass achieved high levels of student and faculty buy-in around foundational skills instruction and the impact on student outcomes. So Susan, welcome to today's webinar, and thank you for joining us. Take it away.
Thank you, Olga, and thank you all for joining today. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about me and then about Clarke University, because I think it sets the stage for how we've been able to develop the Clarke Compass, what's worked well, what has been a challenge, and what's been an opportunity for us moving forward. This is my fifth year at Clarke University as the Vice President for Academic Affairs. And when I entered the institution, I came in with certain assumptions that I will tell you about in a moment. But one of the things that I was learning about was that the institution had gone through a strategic planning process, was in the middle of a strategic plan, and the Clarke Compass, what we ultimately called the Clarke Compass, was going to be a big part of that experience. But about the Clarke University experience, we were founded in 1843, celebrating 175 years, which gives us a long, rich tradition of success as an institution. We were founded by the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. We are the only BVM university in the United States, and so our foundress, Mary Frances Clarke, challenged us to be progressive with the times, and part of the Clarke Compass's focus is how do we remain and exceed at being progressive with the times. We are a Catholic institution, as you might imagine, being founded by the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And what's important to understand is an institution that is a Catholic big C institution. We're also a Catholic little c institution, that we're very much about inclusion and social justice and charity, and we actually have core values that are associated with the BVM sisters that are also university values that are included: freedom, education, charity, and justice, that guide the Clarke University experience as well. We were originally founded as an institution for preparatory education for women that quickly moved into a women's college and moved coeducational in 1979. One of the things that Clarke is known for is that on one side of the street, we're a smallish campus. All of our buildings are connected, and in 1984 there was a fire that destroyed the center part of the campus the Thursday before commencement, and commencement actually took place. And so it's very much a part of the BVM core values and who we are as an institution. But the students hung a banner the next day that noted that Clarke lives. And we use that phrase in context of not only do we live, we thrive as an institution, and we care about students' lives and career, not just their career and success in that way. Today we are an institution that is small. We are enrolling approximately 1,100 students from both the associates to doctoral level. We are primarily an undergraduate institution, but we offer master's degrees and 2 doctoral degrees, a Doctor of Nursing Practice and a Doctor of Physical Therapy. And we allow students to matriculate as undergraduates as a 3+3 to the Doctor of Physical Therapy program as well, which is related to the fact that we are known primarily for our health sciences. Our largest undergraduate major is nursing. We have a wide array in the liberal arts traditions of programs in many different areas. And the last bullet that I shared there is that we are also very well known for having many student athletes. So approximately our undergraduate population, about half, or a little over half of them, are engaged in some form of athletics. We are a member of the NAIA organization for athletics. So for today's agenda, what I want to do to show you really how we've really tried to introduce and integrate the holistic student experience, I'm going to talk about the context and development of the Clarke Compass, some implementation processes that we had as we were developing and implementing the Compass, some key features that make it, again, distinctive to the experience of the Clarke students, what we've learned in the context of assessment and tracking of engagement of those co-curricular experiences that students have, how that Clarke Compass continues to be a work in progress, and some lessons that we've learned along the way, and some recommendations that I would make for you in the process. But before we get to those items, we're going to start with a poll. So for our first poll, I'm very curious, as your institutions are in existence currently, does your college or university accept co-curricular experiences to meet the graduation requirements for your general education? And so I see our poll is open. Yes, Olga?
It is. So go ahead and select the response on your screen. 1 second. It looks like it just came down. We're going to put that back up. All right, there you go. So you should still be able to respond. Great. Sorry about that, Susan. It cut short, but it looks like we had a 50-50 split so far. So 50% said yes, 50% said no.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I would say that as a small college university, one of the things that we talk about is that by coming to an institution like ours, we very much value that holistic experience for students and that learning occurs inside and outside the classroom. So I'm not necessarily surprised that we would have so many who are already accepting co-curricular experiences to meet the requirements of general education. And when we talk about co-curricular experiences at Clarke, we're not just talking about students' abilities to take internships or clinicals or practicums. We're also talking about they can meet graduation requirements by taking a leadership role, for example, in residence life. So the second poll I'm going to ask is your college and university currently or considering accepting co-curricular experiences to meet requirements for your general education?
All right, so this one is up and ready for everybody to answer. So please do select on your screen what your best fit is.
So I mentioned that we allow students to have experiences in residence life meet graduation requirements. Students' involvement in athletics can actually meet graduation requirements. Students' involvement in campus ministry or engagement in mission are ways that they can meet general education requirements at Clarke as well.
So for a second there, we had a majority, but at the last second, this came in at 50-50 split too.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So I'm hoping that by sharing the experiences that we've had here at Clarke, for those of you who are considering this, that you'll have the opportunity to learn from some of our missteps. But for those of you who are already doing this as well, again, we'll have question and answer at the end that I'm hoping that we can engage a little bit about the context of assessment versus tracking when it comes to co-curricular experiences meeting graduation requirements. So as I mentioned at the outset, when I came to Clarke University in 2014, they were in the middle of a strategic plan, and the guiding force vision for the strategic plan was that rooted in the Catholic tradition and the core values of the BVMs, again, those are freedom, education, charity, and justice. Clarke will be a vibrant, relevant, and collaborative environment that creates career and life-ready graduates. And that career and life is really important to who we are and the messaging that we use when we talk to prospective students, when we talk to employers, when we talk to current students about what the Clarke experience offers. And we want them to positively impact the organizations and communities in which they work and live. And so we say that we're not just focused on your first job, we're focused on your learning throughout your life and ways that you can be prepared to contribute to society beyond that. Part of that strategic plan was to develop a convergence program, the signature student experience that does a full integration of the liberal arts, general education, experiential coursework, global experiences, and co-curricular offerings, as well as those BVM core values. And we really wanted this to be an experience that set Clarke apart from other institutions, that especially small institutions, private institutions, where we talk a lot about small, caring, and friendly, which we are, but we also wanted to offer students the opportunity to understand that we really wanted to create an opportunity for them to holistically integrate their experience at the university. And so what happened was in the year prior to my arrival, so it would have been 13-14, there was a committee that was impaneled that included faculty and staff and some students that were tasked with asking the question of what does a convergence program mean? What does it look like? What kind of outcomes do employers look for in a career and life ready graduate? And so they did a lot of research on other institutions that offer something similar. They tested employers, they talked to current faculty and staff, to prospective students and so forth, to really develop those 4 additional outcomes to the existing general education outcomes, because we really wanted to honor and formalize that co-curricular learning. Now, I'm going to pause here and say that when I entered into the university, I entered with certain assumptions. I was told that in my new position, I would be responsible for the development of implementation plans for these 4 outcomes that had already been identified. And we hadn't actually named it COMPASS at that point. It was still being called a convergence experience. My assumptions were that there had been full faculty involvement in the development of those outcomes, full faculty endorsement and understanding of those outcomes. And I also misassumed that there had been a revision of the general education outcomes as a part of this process, not just a simple addition of the outcomes. I quickly learned otherwise when I arrived on campus, that there had been faculty involved, but there had not been full faculty involved. There had been a communication plan with internal constituencies, but not a full communication plan. And so there were things that I had to do pretty quickly to pivot to make sure that we were honoring the shared governance system where faculty do own curriculum and the graduation requirements and general education, and at the same time feel the pressure of this is part of the strategic plan and we do need to move forward. And so I found ways to bring the implementation process for faculty consideration and voting and approval as well. So the general education outcomes that I walked into as the institution included spiritual growth, competent use of language, our communication, so it's not just a written language, but spoken and nonverbal as well, thinking skills, critical thinking, and integration of knowledge. And as we looked at what employers were saying, those were very much still things that were relevant. And so with the implementation of the signature experience, there wasn't necessarily a, hey, we need to drop those general education outcomes. But what we heard from employers and constituencies is that there really were additional outcomes that they wanted graduates of Clarke University to possess. And those included intercultural engagement, leadership, professional preparedness, and self-sufficiency. And so in practical terms, and I should mention real quick as well, at the center point of the Clarke Compass, and the reason why it was named the Compass, at the center point of the compass is what we consider the common good, that which benefits all. And we decided on the name Compass because we wanted students to come into Clarke and realize that this holistic learning was going to be their guide, and they got to carry their compass with them in the extent of they were going to navigate the path of learning both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, and that we were going to be guides in the process. And that common good called them not just to learn to their own benefit, but learn in a way that would allow them to be active social agents in their time, making a difference in the world that they exist. And so in practical terms, for the 4 new outcomes, similar to our other outcomes, we developed competencies and requirements, and that was really the role of the implementation team that I inherited when I walked into the university. And so, for example, I'm going to give you for each of those outcomes some examples. So for intercultural engagement, some of the competencies include cultural self-awareness and openness to difference, among other things. But the way that translated into requirements was that students could take coursework as a part of the meeting of that requirement, but they could also do immersive service projects, or they could go on mission trips with campus ministry, or if they study abroad, regardless of the courses that they took, they would meet that intercultural engagement outcome. The leadership outcomes, some competency examples, are team building and taking initiative. And so what does that mean in the requirements? One example, students could take coursework, in particular from our business department, that was on specifically leadership and theories of leadership, or students could choose to participate in Clarke's CU LEAD, Clarke University LEAD, a leadership development program that was totally developed and best practices with a social justice and civic engagement framework that students have progressive opportunities over the course of their time at the institution that ultimately results in a community action agency plan and project. And so they could use that student life experience to meet the leadership requirement. For professional preparedness, some examples of competencies were to gain work experience and use technology in professional ways, again, among other competencies that were part of that professional preparedness experience. And for this experience, students could take traditional experiences that have course credit tied to them. So for example, they could do practicums, internships, field experience, clinicals, student teaching, and so forth. But they could also, in their major, say, I want to go to graduate school, and for my professional preparedness experience, I'm going to develop a plan on all the things that I need to do to successfully apply to graduate school. And so they put together a professional preparedness plan, and they work with a faculty member in their program or their department, develop that plan, and talk to career services to make sure that they're getting access to all the resources necessary. And that plan and that process could be the professional preparedness requirement. Most often that outcome was being met in the context of their major. The last outcome, original outcome of the compass, was self-sufficiency. Some competencies for self-sufficiency include self-awareness and decision-making, informed decision-making. And for that outcome, we asked all students as they entered into the university to develop what we called a MAP, which stood for Make a Plan, that clearly outlined all of the compass outcomes, gave them lots of examples of ways in which they could meet those outcomes, and we asked them to start thinking about how would you like to meet these outcomes, because they had a lot of autonomy in the development of the ways in which they're going to meet those outcomes, be it curricular or co-curricular as well. We also asked students to engage in 3 what we called self-sufficiency activities each year. And we expected that those activities would be developmental in nature. So freshmen, for example, may be engaging in self-sufficiency activities such as going to sessions housed by or offered by our academic resource center on time management or study skills or things like that freshmen usually need a little bit more kind of guidance and support. By the time that they're seniors, self-sufficiency looks different, and so we offer different kinds of self-sufficiency experiences, such as financial literacy as you're entering into life beyond Clarke University. Somewhere in between, we had things like, for example, mindfulness sessions jointly offered by our religious studies and social work department, and self-defense offered by our campus security. So again, the Clarke students were meeting these graduation requirements between a combination of curricular and co-curricular experiences. So some key features of the Clarke Compass as it was developed is that it allowed for a lot of flexibility. So students did have the structure of that traditional general education where they had courses that they were required to take, proficiencies that they were required to meet, but they had a lot of flexibility in how they could meet their Compass requirements. Students did have a lot of autonomy, and we asked them to be intentional. We asked specifically, advisors asked, what are your goals? What do you hope to make of your college experience? How would you like to demonstrate yourself as a leader or as a member of a successful group? And so we looked at how can students make this about meeting their goals for their Clarke experience. We very much talk a lot about how this still allowed them to be on track for 4-year graduation. Part of the reason why we were able to use that kind of language is because even before the Clarke Compass launched, in the development phase, as we were talking about what kind of outcomes do we want to have, there was an assessment of current students who are not under these requirements. And for each of the outcomes, we were asking questions about, are students doing these things right now and already? And although they weren't necessarily every single student doing those things, the large share of our students were already engaging in experiences in and out of the classroom to meet those requirements. And so we have been very easily been able to keep students on track for a 4-year graduation. We say that the Compass encourages students to try new things, to go to activities in intercultural engagement that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise, or to take a self-sufficiency experience that might push them out of their comfort zone. And so we want them to really engage in new activities, try new things, but also be able to document those things. One of the other key features of the Clarke Compass is that students are able to track their activities with an electronic record. So Clarke University has a partnership with Campus Labs, and one of the modules on Campus Labs is what it used to be called Collegiate Link. They've moved that name to Engage, and we actually have named it The Source. And so we see The Source as a way for students to gain information about student activities and what's happening in the events and so forth. And within this system, The Source, we actually have the ability to track their Compass requirements. And so students can document the kinds of experiences they're having to meet the outcomes of the Clarke Compass, which results in ultimately them having, in addition to their curricular transcript that they get from the registrar's office, they have ownership of a co-curricular transcript that allows them to be able to communicate all the different ways in which they've met these outcomes. And again, with the idea at the center of this is the common good. And so it's not just for the benefit of themselves, but for the benefit of all. And so we help them in the ways that they try to communicate their experiences at Clarke University, really trying to integrate that whole experience that students have. And as I mentioned before, it acknowledges what students were already doing on our campus, making it formalized that curricular and co-curricular experiences are an important part of their Clarke experience. Now, as we've moved into the tracking of this experience, we've had some really interesting conversations with faculty. In that top portion where it says curricular assessment, faculty are very comfortable in this world, in that we have rubrics for everything. We have rubrics for speaking, we have rubrics for writing, we have rubrics for thinking, we have rubrics for spirituality. And these rubrics have been developed by faculty, and they've been revised, they've had lots of conversations. And what I found at our institution is that we actually are really quite skilled at assessment. In fact, the Higher Learning Commission, when we had our review in 2014, they said, wow, you guys are doing so much assessment. Congratulations. Maybe you're doing a little bit too much assessment. And so we have a faculty who've bought into that curricular assessment. When we started requiring co-curricular experiences for graduation meeting general education requirements, what we found is that there's an ease of measuring involvement. So for example, on self-sufficiency, I can have students swipe in with their ID cards in a system that tracks them coming in and coming out. So I can see that they've done it. We can have students fill out a quick survey, tell us quickly the activity they've done, and one takeaway. What we struggled with a little bit, at least initially, was that we were having a difficulty in measuring how students were learning in those experiences. And so we have what's called a Compass Advisory Council, a group of faculty and staff from student life who are responsible for approving things to meet these co-curricular requirements. So if somebody wants to have a requirement that meets leadership, for example, it has to be approved first by this advisory council. But then they also have developed ways to try to do some pre and post measure of student understanding, learning, and reflection. And this council has actually been responsible for reviewing the submissions of the students to see, are they actually learning from these experiences? And that's been a more challenging experience for us because we understand assessment of learning in a curricular fashion, but it's been a challenge to learn a little bit more about co-curricular. And so I'm going to bring about my next question. So my question is, do you have structures or processes in place for assessing co-curricular experiences? So Olga, I'll let you open the poll.
All right, it's ready for everybody, so go ahead and put in your answers.
One of the things, again, I mentioned Higher Learning Commission. We, in 2014, had a very successful full review and went on to the open pathways. And we've just finished our assurance argument update in this past summer. And what we found was that we do a good job of assessing co-curricular experiences from a student life and engagement standpoint and the extracurricular experiences, but we hadn't assessed them in a way that really answered the question about, are these students meeting the competencies for graduation requirements? And so that kind of midpoint for us for the Higher Learning Commission really caused us to pause, because when we were last reviewed, we had not implemented Compass yet. And so this midpoint gave us the opportunity kind of to re-examine where we sat in the process.
So Susan, looks like we had 75% at yes this time and just 25% at no.
Okay, wonderful. So for that 75%, I would say kudos. And whether you're an HLC institution or not, that's becoming more and more a priority and expectation in accreditation. And so for the 25% of you who say no, I would say really this has to be a conversation that exists not just in the student life standpoint or in those who are offering those co-curricular experiences, but really holistically as a university. So my last poll that I have is asking the question of, does assessment of the co-curricular experience at your college or university involve faculty? And I'll let you open the poll for that one.
All right, last one, everyone. So go ahead and put in your answers.
So while you're answering that question, I will say again, Clarke has done a fantastic job even before the Compass experience, assessing that co-curricular experience, that extracurricular experience. And I would say that the reason why we've done such a good job is because our student life has had a seat at the table on our assessment committee and our program review committee. And what I would say had been a misstep for us until recently is that all of the assessment that was done was being done by staff and not being done by faculty. Now, again, the Clarke Compass has forced us to pause and ask the question of how can faculty be involved in this process? And I would say that, again, we've figured much of this out, but I wouldn't say we've got it perfect. And so I'm curious to the results of this poll.
So this one has flipped. We had just 25% at yes and the rest at no.
Yeah, and I think this is a good example of where even if you're at an institution where academic affairs and student life very much work hand in hand and are good partners, where I feel like we are at Clarke University, that we often still pull apart from each other when it comes to assessment in the context of we don't feel like we should be playing in each other's sandboxes and that we might not have the expertise to be partners in that process. And I would say, especially if you're having co-curricular experiences meeting general education outcomes, then it's essential that the faculty are involved in the process. And the same is true of having the opportunity for student life colleagues to be involved in the assessment of curricular learning. There's a great opportunity to share the experiences together in a way that there can be development and learning. And so I mentioned at the beginning of my agenda that this is a work in progress. So again, 2014 and 15, the Clarke Compass had already been developed, the outcomes had been established, and so when I came in 2014, we really began to work on the development of those implementation plans. We had the competencies outlined, how were students going to meet those requirements. And so in then 2015, the Clarke Compass launched for first-time, full-time students. And so students entering, whether they were entering with credits that made them at a sophomore level or not, first-time, full-time students were entering under the Compass requirements. So they had not only what we considered their general education requirements, they had the Clarke Compass requirements as well. Interestingly, in that same year, our general education, those 4 outcomes I mentioned previously, underwent review. And it was just the timing of the cycle of our review process. Our academic program review, our programs are reviewed on a 5-year rotation. Our general education was reviewed on a little bit longer rotation, and it just happened that year was the year that it underwent review. And so I had at that time a director of general education and a general education advisory council who had prepared the self-study, had submitted the self-study, and then my program review committee went through the review process. In 2016 and 17, our president said that she was very pleased with the launch of the Clarke Compass, that students were being able to track their experiences, were being able to make some intentional decisions about how they wanted to make the most of their Clarke experience. But she really challenged the faculty to do a full integration of the Clarke Compass in a way that we no longer talked about general education and the Clarke Compass. Because one of the things that we learned was that students were saying to us, you know, I feel like I have to do extra stuff because like students before only had to do general education, now we have to do gen ed and Compass. And so starting in 2016 and 17, we started to eradicate the phrase general education from our vocabulary. We moved first into what I call their clunky language of the curricular component of Compass and the co-curricular component of Compass, which was the old gen ed and the new Compass outcomes. And it was very, very clunky language. And if your campus is like my campus, then we tried to put it in acronym form and it was just confusing. And so we had discussions at that point of how do we really talk about this in a way that's not confusing and that makes sense for students, that they can be excited about the experiences that they're going to have. Because general education had been reviewed in the year prior, there was faculty discussions, a full year of discussions of what were the results of our general education review. And we certainly saw that in the outcomes of spirituality, communication, thinking, and knowledge, students were making progress. And we affirmed that those were outcomes that we wanted to continue. However, the way in which students were meeting those outcomes needed to be reconsidered. And so in that year, we started having conversations about revising what had been called general education and moved into that clunky language of curricular component of Compass. And part of the reason we wanted to do a revision, had conversations about revision, is because we had a fairly large and traditional general education requirement. So students were doing roughly 48 to 52 credits to meet that curricular component, and then we're required to do some co-curricular on top of that. And so you can imagine students were a little bit mixed in their response to the implementation of Compass, because they felt like, again, is this an add-on to what I have to do? Is this something that I'm going to do it anyways, why are you requiring me to do it? And so the feedback was a little bit mixed. And so we were trying to learn from that process. And one of the things that we were trying to learn as well is how do we better communicate about the Clarke Compass experience? And we began working with marketing to do some branding and communication about the Clarke Compass. And so you'll see here that we've actually developed a website for the Clarke Compass. And I'm going to scroll and give a little preview into the information in that. You'll see that we now have 6 outcomes instead of 8. But what we've done is we've worked with our marketing department to give us an opportunity to be able to talk about this as a signature experience for students. Most institutions don't try to sell their general education to prospective students, but we actually do. And I'll tell you at the end how we try to talk about that as well. But for each of the outcomes, you can click through, you can see that we try to be very visual in how we're communicating, that the student has many different ways that they can meet those outcomes. We've got students' language in their words of how they're meeting the Compass experience, and how we're defining the Clarke Compass as well. And so we really tried to do some branding in this process with marketing. We've also created videos, and I'm going to click on this real quick to show you one of the videos that tries to introduce the Clarke Compass experience.
Clarke University's personalized, one-of-a-kind plan that tracks your movement through college to ensure that you are career and life ready upon graduation. 6 outcomes are involved in the Clarke Compass. Communication. Being able to communicate appropriately and effectively is one of the most important life skills you can gain. You'll demonstrate excellent use of written, oral, and nonverbal communication proficiencies in a variety of social, professional, and scholarly settings. Global awareness and social responsibility. This involves interacting with those who are different from you. Whether you study abroad, support a local mission, or attend a training session on inclusivity, you are learning to understand and appreciate diversity. Knowledge. This outcome involves dipping your toes into many areas of knowledge. You'll demonstrate a depth and breadth of understanding across the fine arts, humanities, natural sciences, and social sciences curricula. Professional preparedness. Upon graduation, you'll be aware of how to present yourself in the workplace or graduate school. Having the ability to understand a situation as well as the capacity to compromise are like gold in the real world. Spirituality. You'll develop respect, morality, a deeper understanding of yourself and how you connect to the world around you, and what it means to strive for social justice. Thinking. You'll learn to employ thinking skills informed by experience, knowledge, insight, and reflection. You'll be able to assess information, a complex situation, or a specific subject and come to an insightful conclusion. This all wraps up into a tidy resume of your well-rounded college successes. There is no better way to measure your engagement within our community and your personal growth through college. You'll connect your own dots to make a whole version of you.
So you can see that we tried to put this into language that would be understandable to current students, but also to prospective students as well. And as part of my role and responsibility at Clarke University, I actually oversee admissions as well, and undergraduate and graduate admissions. And these are videos and websites that we actually use in the admissions process that we use as teasers for students to better understand that what we do here at Clarke is distinctive. It's not necessarily unique, but it's distinctive. We also try to create videos in ways that deal with each of the outcomes that were based upon the feedback that we received from students about how they met the requirements for the various outcomes that we offer. And so we try to capture this in the students' words. And so I'm going to show you one more quick video.
Hey, ever wonder how you'll get a job after college? Meet Matt. He's here to show you his own journey at Clarke University towards professional preparedness, or in other words, finding a job 101. Matt wants to be an elementary school teacher, or possibly a volleyball coach. To him, they're both awesome paths. He's an education major and serves as captain on the men's volleyball team. Through his major, Matt's teaching in real classrooms and creating active lesson plans. He works with kids from every socioeconomic group, which gives him experience in uncharted situations. That sometimes he's the only positive role model the kids have. Even after 3 years, he remembers each and every one of his past students' names and what their needs were. Back to volleyball, Matt's other true love. He's a captain on the men's team and coaches the women's team. Coaching's really upped his organizational and critical thinking skills. He has sharpened his communication skills and learned the very important talent of being an active listener. After 4 challenging and amazing years at Clarke, Matt's able to look back and see how everything he has done intertwined. His teaching, coaching, playing on the team, the broad spectrum of classes he's taken, they all mesh to make a whole picture of himself. He feels well prepared to go out and snag that dream job.
So again, we gathered information from students to learn how they met their outcomes and requirements, and we used that to create these videos so students can see specifically what does it mean to be professionally prepared? How am I going to meet that requirement when I come to Clarke University? And so we tried to use students' words in creation of those experiences. We've used these again for internal and external communications to help the internal and external audience understand what we're trying to do in the development of the holistic individual, again, to make them career and life ready and integrate what employers are saying are essential skills. We've used this branding and marketing with donors and with trustees, and in fact, we have a trustee who is a donor who got so excited about what we're doing with the Clarke Compass that she and her husband have established what she's called the Compass Pioneer Award, where students can apply for additional funds between their sophomore and junior year to expand and enhance their Clarke Compass experience. So for example, before I called it intercultural engagement, we've changed that language to global awareness and social responsibility. Students can meet that outcome by studying abroad. And so students can now apply for the Compass Pioneer Award that allows them to have some additional funding to enhance that experience, to make it, again, truly intentional and holistic in their development. Or, for example, if a student wanted to apply for that award, they could use that money to enhance their professional preparedness experience, perhaps engaging in research and take that research to a conference and so forth. And so we do give the opportunity for students to get excited about this, but we've also given the opportunity for donors to get excited about what we're doing as well. And employers and prospective parents especially love what we're trying to do to acknowledge that learning occurs in many different ways and holistically. So in 2017-18, last academic year, what we did was we continued the discussion of the revision of the Clarke Compass, and we have stopped using the phrase general education. We've also actually stopped using the phrase co-curricular and curricular, and we now just talk about the Clarke Compass. And so in that process, the faculty had voted on revising the outcomes. So we went from 8 outcomes down to 6 outcomes because we learned from students that some things were overlapping in what we were doing, some competencies overlapped, and some things just seemed like busy work. So for example, the self-sufficiency outcome, although very important to us and very much still a part of the Clarke experience, no longer is an outcome, and it's now a goal for the Clarke University experience. And so students are still expected to engage in self-sufficiency experiences, but it's not a graduation requirement anymore. The leadership outcome, we found had quite a bit of overlap with the professional preparedness outcome, and so we have integrated those 2 outcomes to make one outcome with the professional preparedness. And so the faculty voted on revising those outcomes at the end of the last academic year. And then over the summer, we had a Compass Revision Task Force that worked on how do we fully integrate those 6 outcomes that acknowledges the student's holistic experience and really allowed for faculty ownership in the process. My apologies. Let me go right there. And so in 2018 and 19, we've continued those discussions of the revisions. After the summer work, the summer task force brought forward 2 models that they believed were different ways that we could revise the Clarke Compass. The faculty have had many listening sessions, many discussions, many conversations of what they want the next Clarke Compass to be. And they have, the task force has continued to revise such that they're listening to the faculty feedback, and that has been really very essential in that the faculty ownership of the process. And so they have revised those originally 2 proposed models down to 1 model that the faculty will vote on at the end of November for the revision of the Clarke Compass. And then with the assumption that that vote is affirmative, we'll develop implementation plans for the revised Clarke Compass January through the summer. And as the VPAA, I'm very optimistic in that the faculty have lots of conversations. And although general education revision can be very personal and can be very political, I think that revision task force has done a very good job of presenting the rationale and listening to their colleagues for feedback to integrate the input that they've received from their colleagues to make this a model that I think will be successful in the vote in November. Some of the features of the model as it's been revised is that they have reduced the number of credits required, so that 48 to 52-hour credit requirement for students plus the additional co-curricular experiences will be reduced such that it gives students a little bit more flexibility in their 124 hours to graduate to, for example, take another minor or take a major, a second major, or study abroad without any concerns of staying on track for graduation, but give them more flexibility in the reduction of that size of that Clarke Compass. There's a further integration of the experience approach, the co-curricular approach to meet outcomes. So for example, spirituality in the Clarke Compass as it currently exists requires the students to take 2 religious studies courses. As they look at the revision of the model, they're looking at proposing students could take 1 course, or required to take 1 course, and then they can choose to take a second course, or they can choose to do intensive experiences. So for example, immersive experiences in campus ministry through retreats, or through engagement in the community, or through exposure and integration into various perspectives of spirituality. And so the faculty are intrigued by this opportunity to let students meet the requirements outside of the course classroom setting as well. One of the other features of the revised model is that the faculty are encouraging each other to have more major courses in the major meet the outcomes, recognizing that there could be, in addition to courses that are specifically designed for the teaching of communication, that there can be courses in the major as well that might meet some of those requirements as well. And so the expectation is that by fall 2019, we will have a revised Clarke Compass implementing. Some lessons that I've learned, and I'm hoping that can be takeaways for you all as you're considering what you would like to do with the integration of co-curricular experiences, especially, again, to make students career and life ready to meet the needs and demands of employers, not just in their first job, but throughout their career, is that communication and inclusion of faculty in particular, but all different constituents, and the development and implementation and planning are really, really important. As I said, I walked into this experience with certain assumptions that were quickly proven to be false. And so making sure that faculty very much are involved in the process is really, really important, because at least at our institution, and my guess is at your institution as well, that faculty really must own the process for success. That doesn't mean that they don't have partners in the process. So we have, again, student life very much in partnership in this process, because we're expecting student life to be part of the delivery of meeting these outcomes as well. But faculty really need to have some sense of ownership for the success of the experience for our students as well. I would say encourage you to find ways to reward innovation. This has been true for us in the context of, as we look to revise the Clarke Compass experience, faculty are really saying we don't have to use that traditional 3-credit-hour model to meet a requirement of general education. So they're having conversations about rewarding innovation for example, pop-up courses. A pop-up course could be a topical course that happens at a particular point in the semester, usually second half of the semester, that may not be full 3 credits, but it could be something that is based upon what's happening in the world. So an example I would use is that I mean, gosh, there's so many things that we could talk about in an academic setting about what's happening in our world right now. But a pop-up course I would have loved to see was, as the Me Too movement stepped forward, we could have had multidisciplinary conversations about what's happening in our world in this moment, from an economic standpoint, from a social standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, from an anthropological standpoint, in a way that really could address issues of global awareness and social responsibility to meet that outcome for students. And so I'm having conversations with our faculty and our faculty development committee of how can administration reward innovation for those kinds of experiences. Again, listening to constituents as you are implementing these experiences is really important. We revised from 8 outcomes to 6, in part because of the feedback from students, faculty, staff, and employers on, okay, there's some redundancy here, or student satisfaction has dropped because of this particular thing. And I'm not saying that that should be the only guide in this, but that it needs to be a part of the conversation for success as well. And assessment, even in the co-curricular, means that you need to ask meaningful questions, but with the intent to revise. And so for us, we have revised our outcomes, we have revised our competencies, because we have learned through the process of assessment of both curricular and co-curricular experiences how we're meeting those outcomes. And the last lesson that I would share is that, from my perspective, and you may disagree, but from my perspective, revision of general education cannot be an every 15-year process, as higher education is moving at such a rapid pace, and we can't take 5 to 10 years to accomplish that revision and the outcome of that. Our students are different today. The outcomes may be the same, but how we meet those outcomes may need to evolve as our world evolves. And so I think that this process for the revision of Compass for us has had a lot of this conversation of, well, that's not what we've always done. And my response is yes, and perhaps we need to do this differently. And so I think the buy-in for the faculty of we need to think about, no longer think about general education, but really think about the learning experiences, holistic learning experiences we offer, has been really a meaningful conversation on our campus. And so I want to end by saying at Clarke University, we don't talk about general education because that's often something that students feel like they have to get out of the way. You'll hear students say, I'm going to take these classes while I'm in high school and dual credit or whatever, because I want to get that out of the way. And it's not that we don't acknowledge that learning happens at that point. Of course we do. But we instead say that the Clarke Compass is the way for students' holistic preparation for career and life. And so I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to say I'm happy to entertain any questions that might occur.
That was great. Thank you, Susan. And as Susan said, if you have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A panel or the questions panel, and we'll be able to feed those over to Susan. And I do have a couple that came through during the session, so let's go through those.
Wonderful.
Just a generalized question, you touched on this a little bit, but was it difficult to get faculty buy-in to the program, and what are your top tips for where to start if you're looking to get that buy-in?
Yeah, absolutely. So because this originally came out of the strategic plan, I think part of the biggest faculty resistance to the experience was that it felt like it was top-down and they didn't have control and they didn't have a say. And so my strong suggestion would be that even if this is top-down, I don't know if this would have happened outside of the strategic plan to begin with, but even if it's top-down, I think there have to be many different points along the way of conversation about how it's really important that faculty own this for the success of it with the students. And because if the faculty don't own it or don't understand it, then they won't talk about it with the students. And so we had some faculty, quite honestly, say, I only talk about gen ed. Somebody else can talk about that Compass thing because I don't know about it. And so I would say making sure that you are having many and different conversations with the faculty about how to buy in and own this experience. And I think part of the reason why we did revision fairly quickly was not only because the general education review, but also because I saw quickly we needed to have faculty feel like they owned this, even though it may not have been their idea to begin with. And so communication and acknowledgement of their important part of the process and helping them see that their colleagues, especially in student life, are also educators. They're co-educators with the faculty, and that learning happens in many different ways is really important. I would encourage that to be really important.
Great. Second question, these ideas are innovative and creative. Our accreditors insist on a number of gen ed outcomes. Do you just ignore those, or do you assess those behind the scenes?
Yeah, so for our accrediting process, the accreditation review process, what we've experienced is Higher Learning Commission, and perhaps I'm missing something, but we've just gone through our assurance argument review. They have not said to us you have to have X number of outcomes in your general education. What they've said is that, again, there's a standard set of expectations for institutions grounded in the liberal arts. And when we submitted our assurance argument, we did not have a site visit, but we had a review team review the Clarke Compass as a part of that whole review process, the assurance argument update. And what they've said is that they actually commended us for doing that holistic integration of learning, and that because we were kind of ahead of the game in the assessment of the co-curricular and seeing that as an important part of meeting the outcomes that traditionally are met as curricular outcomes, that they saw this as really a model for institutions to consider. And so we did not experience any kind of accreditation hiccups or discouragement in the process. If anything, we got, affirmation and accolade for it.
Great. And we had a question from a school that's a bit larger in scale and has a larger enrollment, saying, it sounds like you're able to get faculty buy-in slightly easier when you're a little bit more cohesive. Do you have any tips or recommendations on how to get to a very large network?
Yeah, I would say that don't necessarily let my size fool you, in that wasn't necessarily an easy process just because we have a smaller faculty. That was a lot of work for, I think, me as a chief academic officer, but for my deans and my director of general education, and for the faculty and staff who were on that original implementation committee, that we did many different communication sessions, some specifically for staff, some specifically for faculty, and we used the framework that was in place of departments and divisions as ways to have conversations with smaller groups of individuals, and we would carry out and share out the information that we heard from those various constituencies with the other constituencies. And so what we learned from the Math and Natural Sciences division, we were telling the Visual and Performing Arts division. And so we were doing a lot of that kind of conversation across, and I would say use the structures that you have in place already as a way to start those communications. And then we hosted many different open sessions where we very much invited people to attend very strategically, where there'd be a cross-section of individuals to make sure that they were having conversations, but also having sessions that were not a specific invitation, that were just simply open forums for us to listen to what they had to say. And of course there were places where there was disagreement, and ultimately you just have to compromise and work towards a vote of the majority. And at the same time, we found that there was much more overlap in what they were hoping for our students than disparity. And so I would say that, more simply, straightly put, politicking in the extent that we really did a lot of the grassroots street campaign and having conversations. And I would say use the structures that exist for that as well.
Great. Looks like those are the questions we have, unless there are any last minute ones anyone wants to put through. All right, great. Well, thank you again, Susan. This was really excellent, and I'm sure everybody appreciates a lot of the practical advice you've given. So I hope everybody else enjoyed it. And if you did miss any of the webinars in our 4-part webinar series, you can use the link on the screen to access the recordings. And as a reminder, there will be a recording of this session shared within the next 24 hours if you'd like to share that with any of your colleagues. There will be a short survey that pops up directly after we close out, and if you don't have time to complete it right now, it'll come through in your email as well. So with that, thank you again, Susan, and hope everyone has a great afternoon.